got it. You must be doing nothing. Bragging every day around you, people know you from end. Telling me you must be ridiculous. Oh, y'all, I'm so, you know, I'm no. Oh, y'all, I'm so ridiculous. Oh, y'all, I'm so, you know, I'm no. God, you're ridiculous. Doing nothing, bragging every day around you, people know you from end. Telling me you got it, you must be doing nothing. Bragging every day around you, people know you from end. Telling me you got it, you must be think you got it. Think you got it, you must be think you got it. Think you got it, you must be think you got it. Think you got it, you must be think you got it. Think you got it, you must be.
Be or not to be. Reminds me of a story.
Ridiculous. Oh, y'all, I'm so, you know, I'm no. Oh, y'all, I'm so ridiculous. Oh, y'all, I'm so, you know, I'm no.
Well, I don't think there's a more essential issue than the issue of climate change.
The future of the auto industry is electric. There's no turning back.
This is a preview of things to come.
More Americans could soon get the chance to drive a vehicle made in China.
The new vehicles that we're making at Ford are data collection machines. They're like mobile drones.
We're going to be noisy, we're going to be disruptive, we're going to be unignorable, we're going to be a pain in the ass until you listen to us.
The first factor, easily discerned by anybody who has their eyes open, that compromises and erodes the hopeless existential view of the world that we're getting from science, is the idea that nature is in fact, across all scales and all levels of phenomena, a unity. It's not a coincidence that electrons spinning around an atomic nucleus and planets going around a star and star clusters orbiting around the gravitational center of a galaxy. It's no coincidence that these systems exhibit the same kind of order on different scales. And yet science would say that is a coincidence. You know, P.W. Bridgman, who was a philosopher of science, defined a coincidence as what you have left over when you apply a bad theory.
truth is not a given.
Vaccine, GMOs,
Jeffrey Epstein,
UFOs.
Splashed. Mark bearing and range.
There are those who want the truth suppressed, sequestered, and exploited. Then there are those who want the truth revealed, disseminated, and uncensored. You are one of those people.
Chester Bennington. He was 41 years old and the artist was found dead.
I see the need for action. I see the need for a great reset.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society.
Hundreds of abusive clergy.
It was unidentified, and that's why it was so unsettling.
You deserve the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Alright, what's up everybody? Welcome to Dauntless Live. I am your host, Adam Riva. Today is July 27th, 2026. My, how time flies. We have an awesome show in store for you today. I'm going to be chatting with my good, dear friend, Simon Esler, who I've known for many years. I'm very excited to dive deep into his brain tonight. We're going to be exploring concepts presented in his new film, in his new series, episode 1 of You Are Here, entitled Cognitive Warfare. Yes, if you've seen it, drop some questions in the chat for Simon. We'll get to them towards the end of the show. But first, head over to dauntlessdialogue.com. We are a streaming platform. We produce original documentaries, docu-series, short films, animated series. We make the best stuff to blow your mind, to red pill you and your family. We try to make it really cool and emotional and engaging and compelling and sophisticated and everything in between. So we could use your support. And if you believe in us and you want to support us on our journey, just click that subscribe button on the top right. And we have a few different tiers. You can consider becoming a member on a basic plan, which is a monthly option. We have an annual plan where you'll save some money. And if you're the type of person who really loves ground floor opportunities, you love supporting your favorite brands with great loyalty at the very beginning when they need it most, you can become a Gold Pass member, which is a one-time purchase. I just want to show you around our website, for anyone who's new, you'll find the same sort of layout that you're accustomed to on the bigger streaming platforms, but we are less than half the price, and I think 1,000,000 times the value. And you can scroll through, you'll see so many different series. We do series on health, on the economy, on politics, philosophy, psychology. We try to touch on so many different subjects so that whenever you come to our website or Roku channel for that matter, you'll find something that's going to be new to you. You'll be on a journey of discovery, and we hope that you'll share what we do with your friends and family. The ones who can handle it, maybe not everybody who can handle Dauntless. And click on series up here, and that'll bring you to our series hub. Scroll all the way to the bottom, click on You Are Here, and this is our latest drop with our guest tonight, Simon Esler. As I said, a friend of mine, a filmmaker, an all-around good guy. Simon and I, we try to get to the nature of reality. We are epistemological thinkers, ontological investigators, and then where we go from there is we try to distill things to their essence and break it down into actionable material for the masses. And I think that Simon and I have some overlaps in the themes that we cover, maybe from different angles, but we both see the value in the nuclear family and in the protection of childhood for the healthy flourishing of civilization, and as perhaps the utmost noblest goal and responsibility of people who get into this is to safeguard the most vulnerable and to expose the evildoers. And so with that introduction, I'm sure many of you are already familiar with my guest, Simon Esler. We've hopefully worked out all the kinks today. Simon, how are you today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me, dude. It's great to be here and excited to get into the depths with you.
Yes. Now, as I'm talking, I'm going to also just make sure that your audio is coming through. Of course, I can hear you, but I also just want to make sure that the audience can hear you too. So I'm going to stall for just a few more seconds because I think Rumble is about 30 seconds behind. Okay. And so we'll wait for that for a moment. And I just want to say, Simon, your new series, which is really a revamped take on a series that we started years ago, life got in the way. It was a little bit crazy. And bingo. Got you, bro. We're good. You're coming through loud and clear. We decided, you know what? Let's go back to this series, unearth it, and breathe some new life into it. And what you've done is incredible, dude. And I know where you're going with the series, or I have a good taste of where you're headed. Episode 2 is well underway, and so people aren't going to have to wait for, months and months for this to come out. It's making you're making your way through it, and it's almost done. So anyway, thank you for joining me, Simon. Let's start, and by the way, I'm preparing you and I'm preparing the audience. We're going to go deep today because I have some really good questions to kind of probe how you think about these subjects. And I want to start with the idea of the exploitation of dichotomies. So when we talk about social engineering, one of the things that I think about is the way that they exploit dualities that are complementary. And so, you have the masculine and feminine, which we've actually done many shows on in the past. The left and right hemispheres of the brain, the linguistic versus the creative, if you will. And we'll probably dive into that one a lot today. You have the dichotomy of the individual versus the collective. You have the body versus the mind, the corporeal, ethereal dichotomy. But for now, I want to pick your brain on the conscious versus the unconscious. And so I want you to just lay out all of your thoughts. What role in cognitive warfare does the conscious versus unconscious mind play?
I think, the unconscious, the way that I start thinking about that whenever I'm in that sort of realm is to look at vulnerability, to look at the parts of us that are open to conditioning in a way that we cannot be aware. And I think as a parent, you really start to see this when you have children. You notice they have parts of themselves that are being conditioned by the world and they have no awareness that it's happening. And you watch them parrot things and carry things into the world and behaviors and all of these things. And you can see that all of that is happening at a level beneath their own awareness. So you really start to reflect on that. Even as an adult, you start to realize, I have my own forms of programming that are operating beneath the surface. So I always start by thinking about it through the lens of vulnerability and where we are vulnerable, where we are innocent in terms of how we can be influenced. And I think that ties deeply to the unconscious. When people talk about their inner child, and this whole process of reparenting that a lot of people are engaged in, in their life now, where they're trying to reconnect with the part of themselves that was innocent, that was childlike, that maybe was abused or traumatized by the world. That is reconnecting with all of that. I think there's a big wheelhouse there to play within, and we'll get into this later, but that really does actually connect quite deeply to the left and right hemispheres in terms of how we experience the world and the way we look at the war on innocence. But I think that's a big part of this, and it's a big inspiration for me in the series. I want people to understand how much of their own programming is operating beneath the surface, to start from there so that their understanding of how the other has been so deeply manipulated is much clearer, because it comes from an empirical understanding rather than a projected one.
Yeah, dude, no doubt. One of the sort of underpinning concepts that you're exploring, you don't actually state it outright in the film, but you circle around this idea of free will. And anytime you get into social engineering or cognitive warfare, it's the subversion of the individual's free will and the supplantation with someone else's agenda, their goals, their ideology, and the kind of machinery to kind of make that come into fruition in the world. And so when I think about free will, I've talked about this in past shows, there are constraints and pressures on our free will. We tend to think of free will as this infinite thing that if we point it in the right direction, we can accomplish anything. And while that's great to tell a child to foster their dreams and aspirations, there are real world constraints and pressures on our free will. An individual who is born, to make an extreme example, without arms or legs or both is not going to be the world's best swimmer. So there's bodily restrictions. Perhaps IQ can play a role. Where you're born in the world, like if I was born in North Korea, there would be significant limitations or constraints on my free will. Of course, I can still act to the best of my ability within a system as I see ethical or moral. But under duress, if you have a gun against your head, you can be perhaps absolved of certain injustices that you're forced to do. At least that's the way that the legal system sees it in the West. You might be suffering from addiction. That could play a certain degree of, that could hamper your free will to a certain degree. And we could list other examples. Talk to me about how you view free will, how the elite view free will, and how your free will is like an obstacle that they need to kind of untangle or understand your psychological levers better than you do so that they can subvert your free will.
I first came to understand the philosophy that our enemy takes on free will when I was researching the education system and looking at the Prussian model that was imported here into North America, and the philosophies of the founders, some of the who became Nazi influences eventually, and you have people that brought it to North America like Ryerson and all these other individuals. The philosophy of some of these people was that free will didn't really exist in the masses. Some of them outright denied its existence and tried to promote this idea that humans were basically just rats in a maze responding to rewards and punishments. And the more you look at someone who upholds that philosophy, the more you realize that they don't count themselves in that. They position themselves as the social engineer, and they see the lowly masses as being basically rats in a maze. So you either have people who espouse this philosophy that in the masses, free will doesn't exist because I'm above them, or there's the belief that they have free will, but they really can't handle it. They're too dumb, they're too incapable, and actually part of them desperately wants to be led. They want to be manipulated and controlled. So I see a huge struggle going on in terms of those philosophies versus where people are at. And then I also see all the layers of conditioning. And this is something I try to touch on in the show. We are enmeshed in so many different layers of conditioning that are controlling what we think and do and say. We have no idea. We don't really stop to consider all the different layers of conditioning, from our family to our local community, to our nation, to the media we consume, to the algorithm we're impacted by. All those different layers of conditioning, they do bring into question how much free will is even left after we've been exposed to a lifetime of that much conditioning. And so what I arrive upon is that the foundation of free will, especially at this time in the human journey, it's the cultivation of awareness first. It's first and foremost like the ability to become situationally aware, because I think the cultivation of awareness and free will are deeply tied together for humanity at this time. And that's, I think, what people are fighting for, is to actually have awareness.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you just used that phrase, situational awareness. It's also the last question that you pose at the end of episode 1. And growing up, that was the phrase that my father used. He inculcated me with situational awareness. You have to have situational awareness. And maybe on some very deep level, that caught traction in my mind and unfolded in ways that are now obvious. When I think about the cognitive battlefield, Simon, I'm thinking about the hierarchy of authority that's going on there. And what I mean is, you, the unwitting bystander, are collateral damage, or maybe not even collateral damage. Maybe you are the object of conquering. But you also have the people who are carrying out the social engineering, carrying out the propaganda, the sophists, the New World Order elite, and the like. And so I see that as like a stratified group. There are certainly people who are raised within these families, and they're subjects of MK Ultra style, trauma-based, mind control, drug-induced from a young age, things like that. And so they're sort of like on the lower tier. Certainly they graduate to becoming, operators in the system. But as you can understand, they themselves are downstream from a certain degree of cognitive warfare. And so there are individuals higher up, we could call them the generals, right? So I'm curious, like, how you view that. Who is conscious of the roles that they're playing, and how deep and how high does that hierarchy go?
That's a great question. I think about this a lot. There's a really interesting sort of contrast going on, because it seems to be that sometimes the severity of the conditioning is what causes someone to flip and awaken out of the mind control. You have some people from these families who the abuse was so severe, or something went so far that brought them to light, or maybe even one of the clearest examples is detransitioners, right? Who have been warped by a kind of mind control, causing, let's say, young girls to believe they're young boys trapped in the wrong body. They went through such crazy mind control that they woke up to it after they had maimed and destroyed their own bodies or made themselves sterile. They woke up to that conditioning, are now advocates for that. I think you have something like that going on, where yes, you may have these bloodlines who are so deeply conditioned that some of them, they are just carrying out the will of that legacy with very little of their own involvement, unless they encounter a catalyst that allows them to awaken and become a voice to expose that. I think the potential to awaken out of that is in each person to some extent. This capacity for free thought, to be born within a programmed being, it's there, but I guess that's one of the struggles that we're defining here when we talk about free will, right? Can they apply their free will to cultivate awareness of their true situation, of their true circumstances, and not the narrative or the meta narrative that designs what they think they're in? And I think arriving upon that situational awareness, that's where the free will lives. I think that's it. And it's true for some of these people in those bloodlines, because some of them, if they were truly situationally aware, might not push these legacies forward.
Okay, so in the first episode, you discuss how there is, and I'm going to actually pull up a quote here. You talk about how the left brain in modernity, particularly in the West, but I would say globally now, has asserted itself and become almost tyrannical, and that is now, it's shaped the environment, which is now sort of shaping us. I don't know if that's how you would word it. You have a quote from Ian McGilchrist from The Master and His Emissary, which is a book you just turned me on to. Thank you. Just started it. You quote him and say, "A century ago, the physical environment was that of the natural world. And now it has been replaced by an unyielding, inert, confrontational environment of non-living surfaces, straight lines, concrete masses, and largely generic shapes. The result is that the left hemisphere's world has become externalized, so that the tendency of the right hemisphere to check with the real world of experience is subverted." And so where I want to go from here is, and I have a few different directions. So when I think about how there's different cultures that sort of have different proclivities with the way that they think. And I think that's what's very alluring for the New Age crowd in North America, is they look to the East and they're like, wow, they're so different in the way that they view things and do things. And it sort of becomes intoxicating and then becomes itself like a container or a gateway drug to other dogmas and delusions. And so going with that sort of idea that different cultures express themselves, let's say, mentally in different ways or perceptually in different ways. There are some cultures that might be, I don't know, more resistant or more compliant with the authorities and with the programming. If you look at China, for instance, it's very collectivist in its culture, in its ethos. And so you sort of look at how they've been taken over at this stage. I'm wondering, in your research, have you come across any cultures or personality types or ethnicities or sexes or anything that are more resistant to the ideological subversion, to the cognitive warfare? And if so, who are those groups, or is everybody sort of equally malleable?
Well, I think what you present is this sort of more global cognitive battlefield, because it's true that if we're looking at the entrenchment of the West, of those of us living in the West, it is different from how people are cognitively entrenched in the East. In China, they have been entrained into a different way of perceiving the world through different narratives and meta-narratives. I would say across the board, where free thought truly thrives the most is in cultures that have stable family units, where the capacity for free thought is something that is protected within the family. That, to me, seems to be the one thing, no matter where you are in the world, if that has a certain amount of strength and stability through the generations, it can resist this this particular kind of threat most easily. In the East, what I believe has happened is that because they have some element of the more right hemisphere thinking, I think that is what has been used to move them towards more collectivist entrainment. Whereas here, the left hemisphere, it's much easier to take a left hemisphere entrenched individual and put them into a form of kind of narcissism and constant self-referential thinking And that really fits nicely as a psyop in the individualism of the West. And so it plugs in very neatly. So I think you have something like that going on, where the tyrants who want to manipulate through maybe a more right hemisphere population like China, they're going to use collectivism more in their foundations. And interestingly, this wasn't surprising to me, but I thought it was such an interesting discovery. I was looking at the way ESG scoring is mapped out between the different nations and the way that they manage this. And your audience might know that in ESG scoring, it's really the implementation of a kind of neo-Marxist, conditioning. It's the whole oppression mind trap. And in the social of ESG, the social is supposed to be the implementation of woke culture in government and in the workplace, right? So those who are scoring well in the ESG scores in the West, they're putting maybe like a trans person as a CEO, and they have BIPOC people throughout their organization, and they can say, we have actually altered the structure of our organization to free these oppressed individuals. They don't do any of that in China. The ESG scoring system does not implement any of that in China. China just said, that's not a fit for our culture, we're not doing that. So China is using ESG scoring to manipulate and dominate their people, but they're not implementing any of the neo-Marxist woke identity politics. So the S in ESG is completely different when it's plugged into China than it is here in the West. And yet that represents a system of control that is being applied to both nations.
Yeah. Wow. Well said. I mean, that resonates with me. I think the psyopery is tailored to the people.
Yeah.
That is, if you're going to admit the skill of our adversary, it is that they understand the complexity of human biodiversity and will tailor social engineering appropriately or respectively to each group. So that resonates with me. You have a quote from the late Boone Cutler and General Flynn from 5GW. You say, everything is weaponized until something better is weaponized. You should protect your mind and control your emotions, or you will become their weapon. And yeah, you talk about how the judge in the Neufeld case demanded that Neufeld get on at the level of perception. And for anyone who doesn't really understand what we're talking about, maybe you can break down the case. You can simplify it for anyone who hasn't seen the episode.
Sure. Yeah.
Go ahead from there. Yeah.
Barry Neufeld was a school board trustee in Chilliwack, British Columbia. And he essentially had found out as a school board trustee that they were about to revamp the whole school curricula and implement what was called sexual orientation and gender identity 123, which promoted the idea that children can be born trapped in the wrong body and used hypersexualized content to educate children, about queer sex and all these things. So there are a lot of problems with it. It was rushed into implementation. So by the time he found out about it, it was going to be implemented 2 weeks from when he discovered this. So as a school board trustee, he was shocked. So over time, he ends up becoming a voice against all of this. And it culminates when he finally says that transitioning children is a form of child abuse. And this is when he is taken to a human rights tribunal for his statements and the claim that he has harmed LGBTQSI plus, the people. The result of that human rights tribunal is that he is charged $750,000. And the judge's ruling specifically stated that Neufeld's refusal to believe in gender identity as a concept constituted existential denialism and was therefore a hate crime. And so that is where they demanded that he actually has to believe at the level of perception in this meta-narrative. And I get into this in the episode. There's reasons that Canada has ended up there and decades of conditioning that got us to that point.
Man, dude, the way that they treat anyone who doesn't believe is they would rather you fake belief so that you uphold the illusion of consensus, right?
Yep.
You talked about how Canada is pushing this curriculum that says that children can be or humans can be trapped in the wrong body, and it makes me think about how they've, people will associate mind with spirit. It's like my mind, my thinking, my consciousness, that is me on the inside. And therefore, if your thinking is, let's say, improper or not biologically, doesn't conform with your biology, therefore your body, you were born in the wrong body. So in other words, your mind is correct. And that's like a spiritual thing that you can't challenge. It's beyond reproach. You cannot assume that someone has a mental disorder or something of that nature, or that they've been brainwashed, which people are brainwashed all of the time. And this is something that they'll even admit. They'll admit that, in fact, individuals who align politically on the left are very quick to call out brainwashing and, you're part of the fascist cult, and they have this sort of corpus of beliefs that it puts the individual, they often will say that the individual is subject to conformity and groupthink and herd mentality and things of that nature. But the fragile mind of a child could never be brainwashed, could never be led astray. What do you think about that?
This is total moral inversion. That's total moral inversion. To take the innocence of children and to erase it, and to say that children are political entities, that childhood innocence is a social construct. This is genuinely coming from some of these theorists. I've seen them write about the child-adult binary and the dangers of the child-adult binary. I mean, that's pretty obvious to me where that's going. The way that we've seen the rest of these deconstructivist narratives play out, once you strip childhood innocence away and make them a political entity, anything goes. And that is the direction that this is going, without a doubt. I think this does culminate in the war on innocence. It absolutely, it ends there. And I think this is a big reason why we're now struggling with, an explosion of extremist groups like the 764, that's a network of online Satanists. A lot of them are minors. A lot of that is minors hunting minors. So that is children who seek to destroy the innocence of other children. And to me, that is the logical end result of the way this agenda has been treating innocence.
Yeah, well said. An individual who has influenced me recently with his books, I've read about 5 or 6 books by Jason Giorgiani, and he talks about metapolemos, which is this war for reality. And he talks about in 1945, when the Americans went into Germany, they encountered the word or phrase Weltanschauungskrieg, which we in the West translated into English as psychological warfare. However, the way that they were using it in the Third Reich was different than the way that we translated it, in terms of Americans or English speakers understand psychological warfare as manipulating your beliefs and emotions about the objective reality. You are a subject within the objective reality, and we're going to manipulate you therein. And Giorgiani asserts that with respect to Weltanschauungskrieg, it was actually understood, and this is coming out of thinkers like Heidegger and Schelling and Nietzsche even, that it was really a war over perception and belief for the unfolding of reality, for the co-constitutive nature of reality, which is to say that when you study quantum physics, when you study Psi, you understand that the individual or the observer plays a role in the possibilities and the unfolding of things, at the very least, scientifically measured on a microscopic scale, but I would argue playing out to the macro scale. And so, for instance, when I had Rob Counts on, our friend, I showed him a video of me doing telekinesis, which I'm able to do when no one is looking, which just sounds very convenient for me, right? But it's actually very inconvenient. It's like I want to show people this skill that I've developed. And, well, there's this sort of negation effect that occurs. So if an individual comes into something with skepticism, it can literally shut down the possibility of the unfolding of my reality and vice versa. And so I want to get your perspective on how Weltanschauungskrieg could play into the cognitive warfare as you see it.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, perception is the key here that unlocks control for them. If we're looking at this through the cognitive lens, that is absolutely the most important part, or the most important cog in your system that they are going to want to access. And I think it does bring up very, very powerful questions about the nature of reality, because even on the basic level of we just live inside narratives, right? Like we experience reality through narratives. And so just on that level of reality, when you're controlling the stories that we live inside of, you're controlling reality in that way, at least just in the way that we see it. But in terms of what kind of reality we are manifesting together on a larger scale, it's really difficult to even put into words the contrast between where we're at now in terms of how deeply influenced and manipulated we are versus what kind of reality would manifest if we were a collective of free thinking individuals. Like, I don't think that has ever existed. I think we've always leaned more towards collectivism, tribalism. That has been our way as a humanity. But I would bring this back to what we were talking about earlier, that I think that the struggle for free will for humanity now in our story, it does come down to this, the individual's capacity to become free thinking and awaken, but so that builds a new experience for the collective. I think that the realization of that is somewhere new that humanity is going, and that gives purpose to the war that we're in. A war that is so cognitive, that is so rooted in perception, that puts so much pressure on you to cultivate situational awareness in a way that we haven't even conceived of until now. I believe that pressure is pushing our evolution in a very interesting and I think overall a very positive direction, but that's the struggle that we're in right now.
Right. So it comes down to those of us who have situational awareness to unplug other people from the matrix, and that's rife with many challenges, because the same way that individuals or groups can be targeted with disparate social engineering tactics that plug into their proclivities and psychology, you sort of need to tailor your red pilling to the individual or group that you're engaging with, because you could end up doing a disservice. You could end up being a bad ambassador for, to use Matrix jargon, like Zion or the real world. Like, you're trying to show people that they're in a system, and you're going to end up like potentially confirming their beliefs that conspiracy theories are unfounded and that, you're a lunatic. It's like, you got to know your facts. You got to know how to speak to different people. You got to use different metaphors for different groups. And so that's a challenge.
None of us are free of any of this conditioning ever at any point. Like, none of us are totally free-minded, free thinkers. We're all constantly contending with some level of influence and conditioning all the time. And I think that when you start to grasp this, and you start to grasp the way that our cognitive system can be toyed with, especially again, like on that personal level, when you comprehend this, then the means by which you communicate this to others, if you're looking to help cultivate awareness in others, you really need to understand your own struggle for awareness, your own ongoing struggle for awareness. So never that it's like the plateau where like you are the one who has reached awareness and you need to bring them to it. It's more like you're constantly in this struggle, because even right now, what you and I are doing, the amount of technology we're engaging in, and a lot of it, this is, we're being disembodied constantly. You have to constantly come back to your body as a practice. You have to build this into your life to protect free thought. You have to have a lifestyle that's going to condition you so that that is available for you. So living that constantly as an individual and really trying to grasp your own personal struggle, to me, that has cultivated compassion and understanding on how to communicate this to others, and to recognize that I'm not responsible for sparking an awakening in someone. I'm more in a position of creating a garden, of cultivating a space that is ideal for awakening, so that the conditions for them, so that the conditioning field that I'm making available for them could potentially lead someone in that direction. And recognizing too that conditioning, we have a long-term and a short-term game, right? And our enemy knows this very well. Some of the conditioning we're looking at is just what's in people's feeds day to day, but some of it is meta-narratives that have been installed over decades. And we need to be thinking that way as well, right? What are we creating that's legacy-based, that's multi-generational? And I think balancing those two, I always come back to that.
I agree. Dropping into my body can even be challenging because I have to get the conscious mind to quiet. Not every night, but many nights in a week, I will turn the lights low, maybe put on some meditative binaural beats or something, and drop in and do some stretches. And for the first 5 to 10 minutes, invariably, like every single time without exception, my conscious mind is like, this is a waste of time. You shouldn't be doing this. Get out of here. This is painful. This is uncomfortable. And then the more time I sit there and I listen to the creaks and the aches in my body, and I give them attention and allow them to sort of express their intention. What is my body asking for? Then I invariably come back to this space of deep connectedness to the earth and gratitude for just being alive. It's like after a stretch, you get a little bit of a high. And I feel like that's like the reward for connecting, and getting out of nature and all those things are important too.
Oh yeah, it's huge. And I mean, I've personally found that these practices at this point, they're a form of warfare in their own right. And being able to cultivate embodiment practices along the way, it's really never been more important, and it's never been more tied to what I believe is essential, which is the ability to cultivate silent cognition. I think silent cognition as a tool is ultimately what we're going to be moving towards, because, this is something that people forget. Within the definition of free thought is the word empiricism, right? If you define free thought, it's the use of logic, reason, and empiricism without the use of dogma, authority, and tradition. So the empiricism piece is glorious, because that is the philosophy that truth is most directly experienced with the body, with our senses. And if our body is our primary truth-seeking mechanism, then how can we think freely if we're not coming back to it and recognizing it as an authority in that process? And that's very tempting in all of this, especially with individuals like you and I who love to get very intellectual. It's very tempting to give the mind too much authority. And I think it's important for people to recognize that that in and of itself is the loss of free thought, because you need embodiment in the heart of free thinking.
It is true. In Hegel's Encyclopedia of the Philosophical Sciences, he talks about how because we have exercised the analytical mind to such a degree through hypertrophy, effectively, evolutionarily over millennia, we have strengthened the mind to such a degree that we've, in some sense, lost, or maybe not fully lost, but put on the back burner the animalistic instincts. And he talks about clairvoyance, and he talks about this sort of these different traits that animals have. It's well tested. It's been empirically shown in a variety of animals that they have these sort of telepathic abilities, particularly dogs. Across the board, you can actually find a chart where they show the degree to which different species express those capacities. He talks about animal magnetism. He talks about magnetic somnambulation and a few other things. And he talks about how these are sort of like atrophied in a sense, but they're there to be cultivated. And I think those are sort of the fruits that are offered for those who are willing to periodically step back from the analytical mind, the frontal cortex, and settle more into the body and rely on your instincts and things of that nature. This is what they've shown in many of the CIA programs or Stanford Research Institute via remote viewing and other verified psychic abilities. And so just as you point out in your series, the left brain has sort of become the tyrant and put the right brain on the back burner. The analytical brain has become a tyrant and put the animalistic on the back burner.
Yeah, absolutely. And recognizing this is a tricky process, because with the mind having been given too much authority, what I found in the beginning of this process was making those discoveries of, coming back to the body, and then noticing when the mind would start to try to take authority again by then analyzing the embodiment process. It's always kind of like creeping. And it's kind of funny the way that we're all dealing with that same struggle. And I think there's something interesting about free thought being tied to embodiment. I find that very, very unique in terms of historical struggles, that we're surrounded by all this technology, that the majority of this war is going on in the digital domain. So nothing to do with embodiment. And yet here we are fighting for free thought and, trying to stay inside of our bodies while we're constantly pulled out of them. It's a pretty wild ride.
Yeah, dude. They call it, in the East, they call it the monkey brain, and trying to silence the monkey brain that just wants to, dance around in your head while you're trying to be still. To what extent, maybe that's the wrong way to approach that question. How do you, Simon, differentiate between the sort of organic myth-making of a culture versus that which is forced or foisted by those with an agenda? Because if you look at different traditions throughout history, they generate myths. It's one of the things that humans are best at. It's one of the things that differentiates us from the other animals in the animal kingdom. So where do you draw that line?
Technology is the biggest factor there, by far, because technology centralized the production of culture. And the centralization of that process had drastic implications, because once culture and cultural trends could be generated in a centralized location or from a centralized source, then all of a sudden, the role that played back when we were tribes and you had, cultural ideals that were used to express things like beauty and individuality and, collective goals and values, that was a co-creative process within the tribe. But the co-creative aspect has been removed through the centralization piece, through technology. And this is why it ties so deeply to warfare, because war has always followed technology. The evolution of technology is the evolution of war. They are forever intertwined. And so, looking at it through that lens, there's really no way around having to struggle with culture now in a way that we didn't have to in the past. I think there are forms of decentralization occurring. I think what we're doing right now with more new media, decentralized media, people are going to smaller sources. That in and of itself, I think, is a response to that dangerous era from which we've just emerged, in which almost all our culture was produced centrally by a small group of people. I think we're moving away, looking at the 90s and the era in which we grew up, all of our culture was just produced by someone else and handed to us. It's very strange now, knowing the role that culture plays and having children and seeing all of that, So I think, again, becoming aware of that process and then taking hold of what kind of culture you're bringing into your life and your home more intentionally, that's starting to, I think, dilute the impact of that centralized process.
In Plato's The Republic, he talks about how perhaps the highest role of a philosopher is to contemplate the good. And from the good, we derive ethics, and we should structure civilization around those baseline, those sort of axiomatic ethical principles that should be woven into the fabric of law. And he talks about how there's the reluctant philosopher king, the philosopher who seeks to understand the good and also understand aesthetics and politics and ontology and epistemology. That person is probably the least likely person to get involved with politics. And right now, if we are to diagnose the West in particular, we have installed Manchurian candidates who are ideologically and sexually groomed in many cases, just look at Macron, to come into power and steer their respective nation state towards an anti-human, despotic sort of dystopian future that loosely, globally, could be called the New World Order. So we have a deficit of philosopher kings. And obviously the system has been rigged against them coming into power democratically through the machinations of the system as it's sold to the masses, as it's described. And so what is your prescription for this? Like, how, as somebody who's a deep thinker, when you think about how the system is rigged, yet we need to get these philosopher kings out there, and do you see maybe a different path, like taking to the masses vis-a-vis social media and promulgating your message where you could reach millions of people and bypass society and maybe steer society through a different system? What is your idea?
Yeah, I think there are two ways that I think of it. One is, of course, that path of being a producer of culture that you feel is going to create the conditioning that is needed both long-term and short-term. So I think and talk a lot about the legacy of free thought. I'm trying to embed a legacy of free thought into my great work, into my family, into my son's lives. And really, I think, focusing that way. But the other way that I look at this is that there seems to be a trend of systemic collapse, of decentralization that is occurring, that is a natural part of the human story right now. I look at the education system as an example of a system that is collapsing, and I think it's good that it's collapsing. I think this massive revolution towards homeschooling and unschooling is a great example of decentralization, of education falling back towards families and small communities. You have a lot of examples of that going on. Same thing with healthcare. The healthcare system, especially in Canada, is in free fall, but the response to that has been people becoming more medically sovereign, seeking health freedom, looking how to be more individually responsible. So I think to some extent, we are waking up to ways in which we can take back control over our culture in this large collective scale. Like X as a platform is an interesting example of that. I think in the information war, it represents people really trying to take control of culture and information and have a collective impact that is different and to condition people differently. But then I also think that the need for conditioning through these big centralized systems is going to lessen as we decentralize, as we move into smaller, more contained groups. I think the global society, I think we're going to be moving back towards more sovereign nation states. It's going to be more like a world in which nation states are defending their own sovereignty and less about a world that is moving towards this globalization, this enmeshment, this transnationalism. I really don't think that's going to play out. I really think the end result will be more contained and decentralized, but that will mean that each of these different nested areas of human society will be then potentially producing different ways of approaching morality, and it might be different for us. I don't know, there might be a different struggle for us as a humanity in the contrast between moving towards some elements of decentralization while keeping some of our collective endeavors together. And I think this lines up with what Noam Chomsky called anarcho-syndicalism, something along those lines, where you have a kind of organized anarchy of more decentralized living. I think that's a direction that we're headed to.
And I could see that plugging in with a lot of what the remote viewers have seen after 2050, where they see there have been several convergent catastrophes that have sort of changed the geography of the planet. Certainly, perhaps it's a pole shift or something to that effect, changing, the coastlines and affecting humanity and our civilizational organization. But I see it going in the way of like a techno-agrarian future. We embrace the labor-saving, life-saving, human output-enhancing aspects of technology, which is what it has always been. Technology has always been to replace or automate or enhance a human ability. And so using that in an agrarian sense, where we're connected with the land, where society is thriving in connection with nature, and hopefully doing so in a sustainable way, I would love for that future. I think AI could really steer us in that direction if we use it correctly.
I agree. I think there's the potential for the realization of that is definitely there. When I look at the story, where we're at in our story, I think there are incredible possibilities for things like that to occur. And, if you look at the process of disclosure that's ongoing right now and the extraterrestrial issue and all of that has the potential to release technologies that could greatly decentralize things. If you look at something like free energy and all of that kind of technology that's been withheld and that has the potential to be released with this push for disclosure that's going on right now, that would open up a lot of those pathways of more decentralized living and people peacefully exploring a different way of organizing ourselves. I think part of what seems to be happening is that there were a lot of background agreements. We had a lot of big agreements that were tying things together globally and across nations and within nations. I think a lot of those old agreements are just going to turn to dust. And we're going to have to look at how are we going to organize without those large scale agreements that we used to have. It's just going to be different. It's going to be qualitatively different. And I don't feel afraid at all. I feel quite hopeful.
Yes, be prepared, not scared. Here we are sort of rounding out the hour, and I'd like to pick your brain on one last concept, and I'll let you go. You and I have both been studying consciousness, particularly recently, with different books as our mental fodder. And I spoke to you off air about Julian Jaynes's The Origin of Consciousness and the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind, which if you're a Dauntless newsletter subscriber, you will have just received that in Adam's book club. So check out my review there. This is a very large concept, but I will try my best to sort of distill it down into its elevator pitch. Jaynes looks back at the evolution of civilization, human civilization, and looks at it from an anthropological perspective, but also in modernity kind of compares that with our neurology and more modern neuroscience. And attempting to answer the question, what is consciousness and where did it come from? Because clearly we are experiencing reality in a very different way through a different medium than the rest of the species on the planet. Why, how, and when did that come about? And if we are to say that Homo sapiens and our antecedent hominid, relatives have sort of evolved over the last 300,000 years, then the last 1% of that, the last 3,000 years or so, is where Jaynes pinpoints the switching on of what we currently experience as consciousness. And before that, and he bolsters this with a sort of multidisciplinary approach of evidence. And he says that he makes the case that prior to 3,000 years ago, humans actually heard an internal voice of authority through this, I'm going to use quotations, this ear inside of our brain in the right hemisphere, which is now vestigial. In the left hemisphere, you have a communication component and a listening component. And in the right hemisphere, you just have that listening component. And the way that we wrote our texts, when we look back, there seems to be, he makes the case that we had an inner voice of authority, which we would then sort of anthropomorphize as the gods, the pantheon. And with modern day schizophrenics, or even non-schizophrenics, you can take a normal person and stimulate that part of the brain with a little bit of electrical current, and they'll start to hear the semblance of that voice. And oftentimes, Simon, it's described as sounding like their biological father or the father figure that raised them. Not always, but often. And it's this sort of booming voice of authority, and it usually commands them, especially in the case of schizophrenics, in an ethical sense or a non-ethical sense. It commands their behaviors and justifies those behaviors. And so my question to you, to kind of bring this all back full circle to cognitive warfare, is that in the modern era, we don't have that inner voice of authority, that inner voice of the gods, or that loud intuition. We are downstream, right, from our family unit, our religion, the nation that we belong to, the general ethos in our local environment. Those are the things that sort of program our ethical voice of authority. That what's that word? Like your conscience, if you will. And so, have we just now sort of, in the lack of having that voice, have we sort of sought out new ones, like powerful, compelling voices in the world today fill that void? Do you know what I'm saying? Oh, I think you're muted. Can you hear me?
There we go. Okay. I'm back. Yeah. I mean, this opens up a lot of things for me. Really, a lot of my understandings that I've been contemplating over, I guess, the past like 10 years. My understanding is that in previous eras of the human story, our inner authority was more like an internal dialogue. And I think that was correct for an era of human existence. And that it was about a kind of internal dialogue that was deeply influenced by dogma and authority. And over time, that inner dialogue became a genuine kind of internal authority that was correct. I believe we are in a different era of the human struggle and of the human story now. And I think that inner authority now lives in the body. It has nothing to do with internal dialogue anymore. My understanding is that we have shifted into an era where it is the body's response to what is going on that gives us the capacity to guide ourselves. It's where our inner authority lives. But one of the tricks we have is that because we existed for so long as a people who used this inner dialogue as a system of surviving and living, there is the stayover conditioning of that from humanity's previous chapter. And I believe that we're shaking that off, that this process of becoming embodied is also a process of discovering a new authority as an individual, a new way to navigate. And I think that that's where embodiment becomes this really exciting piece of this whole puzzle, because my experience with this is that embodiment and the body as a source of authority, especially in decision making, is a huge sense of relief in comparison to a mind that is constantly reflecting nonstop conditioning, and is really going to do that, until the day that you die. The mind is kind of like that. So I think there's a larger story playing out here, and it's very intriguing to me that he has found that on a more scientific level, whereas I have to admit that I discovered those shifts through the lens of human design, and it says the same thing. It looks at the impact of neutrinos during earlier eras of human existence, and its theory is that the flow of neutrinos at that time influenced humans to have an internal mental dialogue as an inner authority, and that is now changing. And just the way that the human story is unfolding is moving us away from that. So I'm curious about the overlap between these two meta-narratives that are very different in their source and their style, but it seems to be coming to the same conclusion.
That is so cool. I love when you bring up human design. Simon, give my audience your reason for making this episode, this series, what you hope they're going to get out of it. Where are you going to go with it from here?
I really want to, number one, offer people a framework that is practical, that is more just doctrine to apply to different circumstances, to the struggle to be aware. So it's not politically charged. It's not a left-wing or a right-wing thing. It really is just doctrine. And I'm excited to offer people a framework that they can keep and apply as they move through life. So that's a big part of it for sure. I really seek to be of service in helping people to protect free thought. And I'm going to be going more deeply into that in the series, but to really identify what free thought is and why it's important and how one protects it through situational awareness. And I think finally for me, I seek to defend children and innocence, and I will be arriving at a point in the series where I bring much more focus on that aspect of our struggle and what it really means to protect innocence and protect the children. So, I hope to be of service in that way and to continue that throughout the series.
It's a fantastic series already. I'm excited to see where you're going to go with it. I encourage everyone listening, everyone watching, go check out the first episode. I'm on the edge of my seat for episode number 2. Simon, your presence on this planet is so powerful and so needed. Thank you for everything you're putting out. Dauntless is so lucky to have you. And again, give everybody an idea where they can follow you, where your socials are, what events you have coming up.
Heck yeah. So I'm actually going to be the MC at the Reclaiming Birth Conference coming up in September. And that is a conference focused on bringing back natural birth, practicing the principle of non-interference, bringing birth back into the home, back to the family. And a big focus this year is empowering fathers and men in terms of being involved in pregnancy, involved in the birth, bringing their children into the world. And if you can, do it with your own hands, get your body in there. That's a big part of it. So as a father who experienced that with 3 different home births, I'm a big advocate. This is my 2nd year at the conference. I really encourage people to check it out. If you know someone who's starting a family or having another child, reclaimingbirthconference.com, and you can use code Simon15 to get 15% off if you'd like to come join us at the conference. There's also my website, simonesler.com, and you can get all my different works. I've got lots of things available. I've got my Legacy Keepers PDF you can download, and my feature-length film cut, Daughters of the West. And you can find me on X, Simon Esler, Instagram, I'm Simon_Esler1111, and you can also find me on Substack. I got lots of new stuff coming out there. You can find me there, Simon Esler, or look for Subversive Clarity.
I always enjoy our conversations. Thank you for joining us, Simon. Until we see each other again.
All right, brother. Thanks so much. Take care.
Head over to dauntlessdialogue.com. You can watch that episode now if you're a member. And the next episode is currently in production. It'll be out soon. We are so thrilled to have Simon. We appreciate deep thinking in the Dauntless ecosystem. We appreciate deep research. We appreciate people who cite their sources. and Simon certainly fits that mold. So head over and certainly, you know, reach out to Simon on social media. Let him know what you think of the episode. Give him that encouragement. We as filmmakers often don't get the feedback and the encouragement that we need. So give him a pat on the back, give him a follow. And if you want to support us, you can head over to dauntlessdialogue.com. This is, once again, our streaming website. We have a Roku channel. Many of you are probably already familiar with everything we do, but we could use your support. We're looking to launch new series and ambitious new documentaries, so please click that subscribe button if you haven't already. And thank you guys so much for joining me tonight. It's always an honor to spend this time with you. I love you all, and we'll see you guys next time. Cheers.
All right, dude. That was a good one. I don't know. We have so much overlap, man. It's never a struggle for me. I'm always like, how do I contain myself and not go too deep? If we don't have time. I can't go too deep into neutrinos. I got to be careful.